Hey class, welcome to Chapter 7, Section 1. America is finally free. We have finally defeated the British. We're no longer a bunch of colonies under the British rule. We are now our very own independent nation. We have a few questions to answer. First of all, what kind of a government are we going to have? What kind of a nation are we going to be? We've been under the British monarch, under the British king, for the last almost 200 years. So we have some big choices to make. So while soldiers are off fighting, a number of political leaders are organizing a new government. And America decided, first of all, that we wanted to be a confederation. What's a confederation? Well, that is a loose association or league of states. The states were kind of loosely bound together. They didn't want to be one strong nation, unified all together. They wanted to be kind of a loose group. They wanted to maintain a lot of their independence as states that they had maybe enjoyed beforehand. And the first governing document is the Articles of Confederation. And they outline the way America is going to be run. It was drafted in November of 77, but not ratified until 1781. It took about 4 years to get everybody to be on board with it. And it's primarily written by a man named John Dickinson. There are a few issues they had to kind of resolve, but heading forward, America is going to be a confederation under this new governing document, the Articles of Confederation. But this document is terribly flawed. There are a lot of issues with it. You see here in the yellow a number of weaknesses. Notice some of them. First of all, Congress had no power to lay or collect taxes. How could the government possibly make any kind of money then? There was no way, because they couldn't collect taxes. Secondly, Congress had no power to regulate interstate or foreign trade. Trading with other states, between states, other nations, the government had no authority over that. Check this one here out, it'll blow your mind. Congress has no power to enforce laws. What is a law if it can't be enforced? It's nothing. And Congress had no authority to do that. If you wanted to enact any kind of a law, fourthly here, 9 of the 13 states had to approve. It's not the worst one on here, but it's incredibly difficult to get 9 of 13 to agree on just any kind of a law. Today in America, it would just be 7 out of 13. Nextly, if they wanted to amend the Articles of Confederation, it had to be a unanimous vote, meaning every single state had to agree. Nearly impossible to achieve that. Next here, no executive branch, no president. They were afraid of a president because they thought he might become more like a king they had had in Great Britain. And they did not want that again. So there was no executive branch. And lastly here, there was no national court system either. And that's going to prove to be a huge weakness of this document. One of the issues, though, the Articles of Confed was able to solve was this issue over Western land claims. You see that down here in this picture. What happened was following the war, as you know, America's border expanded all the way here to the Mississippi River. So colonies like North Carolina said, sweet, we'll expand our border all the way to the Mississippi River. And Georgia says, sweet, we'll expand ours all the way over to the river. Well, that's fine for North Carolina and Georgia, and you see Virginia here. But what about poor New Jersey in here? How about Maryland, Delaware? Those states said, hold on, you can't expand your borders like that because we can't expand ours. We are locked in by these states. So that was one reason why it took 4 years for the Articles of Confederation to get ratified. They had to work out some of those early kinks. So this document, though, did do a couple of good things during its time as our governing document. Laws that were passed during its time was the Northwest Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. There were two plans dealing with the Northwest. Well, what's the Northwest back in 1785? It's this area right up here. Today we think Northwest, we think of Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. However, back then, Northwest was Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, and so forth. So that's the territory we're referring to. In the Northwest Ordinance of 1785, it divided the land up into 6-mile square chunks called townships. Notice here, the township they've identified, this red one right here. But that one township, 6-mile square area, is divided up into 36 little units, as you can see here. And people could then purchase one of those units. 640 acres, sold at an auction, minimum price was $1 an acre. And they would even set aside some of these for schools. Now, if you couldn't afford 640 acres, you could maybe even buy just a smaller chunk and divide it up among some other people and pay a smaller amount. But the Northwest Ordinance of 1785 set up a system, a plan for selling this property and this land. And then, 2 years later, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 got passed. And that ordinance set up a plan for how a territory could become a state. It said that once a state had reached, or a territory had reached, 60,000 people, they had a constitution approved by the Congress. And that constitution, by the way, had to provide for freedom of religion, and it forbids slavery. Then that territory could become a state. And you see here in the bottom box when all of those areas became states. Ohio as early as 1803, and the last of that area being Minnesota in 1858. This was one of the real achievements of the Northwest Ordinance of 1785 and 1787. One of the things that happened, we just saw the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, but one event really told the states that we've got to make a change to this document, to our country. And that event is called Shays' Rebellion. Daniel Shays is a farmer who lives in Massachusetts. Well, Massachusetts placed a new tax on its farmers, a very high tax, and it was a way to help them raise money to pay back some of the war debts that they as a state had during the Revolutionary War. Well, many farmers fell behind on their taxes, and many of them filed bankruptcy because they could not pay. So Daniel Shays ordered a revolt of area farmers, and they clogged up 4 courthouses, just kind of went in, sat in there, some violence ensued. A militia came in to hold off Daniel Shays, and Daniel Shays and his men went off and got a stockpile of weapons. It became really messy. But the reality was, the federal government had no authority to do anything about it. Remember, they couldn't enforce laws, they couldn't tax, so they couldn't put together any kind of an army. So this event showed the states just how weak the government was, and they needed to have a stronger government in place. And so the Founding Fathers, key men in American history, began to gather together and to talk and say, boy, we have got to make some changes to this Articles of Confederation. So the Philadelphia Convention was called in 1787. This is 6 years following the document being ratified and approved and ready to go. And some of the major players there were people like George Washington, who's going to end up being kind of in charge of the entire meeting, going to provide some great leadership. Men like James Madison, who's been called the father of the Constitution. His wisdom is going to come into play. George Mason is there. He had previously written the Virginia Constitution and the Virginia Bill of Rights. Benjamin Franklin shows up, 82 years old, as the oldest delegate. And then a man named Alexander Hamilton, who we'll hear about from more later. He's from New York, and he was like, boy, we've got to have a stronger national government, a government with some legs that has some authority. Well, these men meet in Independence Hall in 1787, and they meet for the purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. But by the time they are done, they have thrown out the Articles of Confederation, and they have written a brand new Constitution that we still follow today, 200 and some years later. So the Articles of Confederation, a short experiment in American history, but definitely one that helped to shape who we are today and helped shape the Constitution that still guides us today.